Chase's chair screeched across my parents' dining room floor as he shot to his feet, waving a glossy folder in the air. "You're serious? You're really giving me the entire buy-in," he shouted. My dad just nodded calm as if they were passing the potatoes instead of promising away their retirement. My mom dabbed at happy tears while I sat frozen across the table. It was Sunday dinner in their Columbus, Ohio split-level pot roast still steaming when my dad turned to me and said, "We back winners, Morgan. Not whatever it is you're doing." My name is Morgan Riley. I was 31 years old when that dinner finally cracked something open in me. Before I keep going, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what the worst dinner conversation you've ever had with family sounded like, because mine turned into a full-blown demolition of my old life. My dad slid a white envelope across the table to Chase like it was nothing, talking about partnerships and expansion and our family's future. Inside was a certified check for $180,000 so my brother could buy into a trendy sports bar franchise on the north side. My mom kept saying how proud she was that our son is going to own something real. When I asked when they'd decided this, my dad didn't miss a beat. "When he proved he was worth the risk," he said. "You jump from project to project. We're done throwing money into the void." The room went quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. I felt my face heat, but instead of arguing, I folded my napkin, pushed back my chair, and said, "Got it. Message received." Then I walked out of their house and, at least emotionally, never went back. People always ask if the dinner was really the beginning. It wasn't. It was just the loudest echo of a pattern that started years before when I was 12, and Chase was the golden 17-year-old with the starting quarterback jersey. That fall, I spent every afternoon after school in the tech lab, building a miniature pedestrian bridge out of scrap aluminum and balsa wood for the district engineering fair. I still remember the smell of hot glue and metal filings, the way my hands shook when my teacher loaded bricks onto the bridge, and it held more weight than any other entry. I won first place. They called my name, handed me a trophy, and I turned to the bleachers hoping to see my parents. The seats I'd saved in the front row were empty. They were across town at Chase's playoff game, cheering themselves hoarse while my teacher took a blurry photo on her old phone so I'd at least have something to bring home. That night, I set the trophy on the kitchen counter, heart pounding with pride, and this small, stupid hope that maybe the win would finally register with them. My dad walked in still wearing his team jacket, high on adrenaline from Chase's game. He gave the trophy one glance and said, "That's nice, kiddo. But you know colleges care more about varsity letters than science projects." My mom was already flipping through photos of Chase on her camera, talking about how recruiters had been watching from the stands. "Your brother's going places," she said. "Imagine if he gets a scholarship. It'll change everything." I stood there holding a plastic statue that suddenly felt like clutter. That moment didn't hurt because they loved him. It hurt because I realized their love was a scoreboard, and I would never be the one putting up enough points for them to notice. By the time we both graduated high school, the rules were clear. My parents took out a home equity loan to cover Chase's business degree at Ohio State and his off-campus apartment so he could network properly. I got a polite pat on the shoulder and a reminder that you're the tough one. You'll figure it out. I worked closing shifts at a grocery store, then overnights at a warehouse, dragging myself to class in the mornings and sleeping in short, ragged bursts. When I got my civil engineering degree, I emailed them photos of the bridges and retaining walls I'd helped design as an intern. My dad replied once, "So you're still renting?" Meanwhile, every call home was a highlight reel of Chase's internships, Chase's promotions, Chase's big ideas. I wasn't a daughter to them so much as a benchmark to measure their favorite child against. The irony is that when I left that dinner, I didn't storm out to make a statement. I left because something inside me finally went quiet. I drove back to my small apartment on the west side, hands surprisingly steady on the wheel, the city lights smearing across the windshield. I put my phone face down on the counter, sat on the floor, and listened to my own breathing. For years, I had twisted myself into knots, trying to become someone they'd finally bet on. That night, I understood that chasing their approval was like chasing the horizon. I could spend my whole life running and never catch it. So I made myself a promise sitting there on the cheap carpet I would never again ask them to see my worth. I would build it somewhere they couldn't touch. Losing my parents while they were still alive was one kind of grief. Losing my job was another. About 6 months after that dinner, the engineering firm where I worked downtown called an all-hands meeting. We'd been hearing rumors for weeks about stalled projects and shrinking city budgets, but I kept telling myself that if I just stayed late enough, double-checked enough calculations, I'd be safe. The partners stood in front of the conference room with tight jaws and careful words about restructuring. Then they read a list of names. Mine sounded small and absurd in that big room. I handed in my key card, boxed up the plant I kept on my desk, and stepped out onto High Street with a severance packet and no idea what to do next. The wind cut straight through my coat as if to underline the point. Back in my apartment that night, the silence felt different from the quiet after that dinner. It was thicker, heavier, pressing in around me as I opened the group family text I hadn't muted yet. The newest photo was Chase standing in front of his sports bar, arm around a cluster of investors, my parents beaming on either side. The caption read, "So proud of our son co-owner at last." They hadn't said a word about my layoff. They didn't even know. I stared at that picture until my eyes burned, then typed one final message. "Thanks for making it clear I'm on my own. I'll take it from here." I hit send, blocked every number in the chat, and deleted it. The screen went black, but for the first time, the dark felt like a blank page instead of a verdict. The next few weeks blurred. I sent out resumes, refreshed job boards until lines of text swam in front of my eyes, watched the savings I'd scraped together drain into rent and bills. Columbus in early spring can feel like it's holding its breath. Gray skies, damp air, everything waiting to bloom, but too cold to try. One afternoon, when I couldn't stare at my laptop any longer, I wandered into a diner I'd passed 100 times and never noticed: Nolan's Corner. The sign buzzed, one letter half burned out. Inside the vinyl booths were "Rip the lights too harsh," the whole place smelling faintly of burned coffee and fryer oil. I slid into a booth with my laptop out of habit and pretended to work while my brain quietly panicked about the number in my checking account. The owner, a man in his 60s with a beard more gray than black, came over to refill my water without asking. "Haven't seen you in here before," he said. When I told him I was between engineering jobs, he squinted at me. "You're Morgan Riley, right? You worked on that pedestrian bridge project near campus." I blinked. Turned out his name was Harvey Nolan, and one of his regulars had been on a neighborhood committee I'd helped years back. "This place is falling apart," he admitted, gesturing at the tired walls. "I've got maybe $10,000 left I can put into it before I have to sell. Think you could help me make it worth walking into again?" $10,000 wouldn't cover a full design fee, let alone my anxiety. But something in his straightforward trust hit me harder than any rejection email. I heard myself say yes before my brain had a chance to list all the reasons it was a terrible idea. For the next month, Nolan's Corner became my entire world. I patched drywall, painted until my shoulders ached, and sketched new floor plans at the counter between cups of coffee. Instead of ripping everything out, I leaned into what the building already was. We pulled down a few bulky booths to open up the space, added a long communal table made from reclaimed bowling alley wood Harvey had in storage, and swapped harsh fluorescent panels for warm pendants. I wired myself. I scoured auctions for secondhand chairs layered in sound-absorbing panels disguised as art, and hung mirrors to bounce light from the front windows deeper inside. Little by little, the place stopped feeling like a time capsule and started feeling like somewhere you might actually choose to linger. When we finally reopened, Harvey stood in the doorway staring around with tears in his eyes. "You brought it back to life," he said. "Feels like the city outside might notice me again." A week later, a local food blog ran a piece called something like "The Surprising Makeover of Columbus's Forgotten Diner," and there I was in one of the photos, paint on my jeans, hair pulled back, smiling awkwardly behind the counter. The writer mentioned me by name as the engineer turned designer who'd reimagined the space on a shoestring budget. I woke up the next morning to an inbox that actually had more than spam in it. A bookstore owner in Clintonville wanted help making her cramped shop feel bigger. A barber on the east side asked if I could modernize his space without losing its old school charm. A couple who'd just bought a rundown duplex asked about structural repairs and layout changes. I didn't have an LLC, a logo, or even a proper toolkit beyond what I'd cobbled together, but I had skills, and no one else was offering me a job. So I said yes, over and over, and in saying yes to them, I started quietly saying yes to myself. One of those yeses took me to a brick duplex in an older neighborhood near German Village. The owner, Harold Carter, was a retired firefighter who'd bought the place as a retirement project and quickly realized he was in over his head. The city required a structural assessment before he could move forward, so they brought in an engineer named Tristan Hayes to evaluate the foundation. The first time I saw him, he was standing in the dirt crawl space, flashlight between his teeth. Dust streaked across his forearms. "You must be Morgan," he said when he climbed out, offering a hand. "I've heard you make sad buildings less sad." I laughed, surprised. We spent weeks on that project, me upstairs, redrawing interior layouts. Him downstairs, reinforcing joists and checking load paths. We fell into an easy rhythm of measuring, debating, and scribbling notes on whatever scrap paper was closest. One evening, after we wrapped up an inspection, Tristan asked if I wanted to grab dinner. We ended up at a little place in the short north, sharing pizza and talking, long after the plates were cleared. When he asked why I'd left a perfectly good job at a firm to crawl around dusty basements for small clients, I told him the truth. I told him about the dinner, the envelope, the way my dad said they only back winners. I told him about years of being the reminder of what my brother wasn't instead of being seen for who I was. He listened without interrupting, just tracing patterns on his napkin with one finger. "You realize," he said finally, "that you've built more on your own in a year than most people do with a committee cheering them on, right?" There was no pity in his voice, just a kind of calm certainty I wasn't used to. When he asked if I had a dream project, the first thing that came out of my mouth surprised both of us. "I've always wanted to turn an old industrial building into something alive again," I said. "Not just a loft or an office, but a whole little ecosystem, studios, workshops, maybe a place to live upstairs. Something self-sustaining like a tiny village in one building." Tristan sat back, eyes lighting up. "A microcampus," he said. "Riverline Works or something. Solar water reuse, flexible spaces." "Why aren't you doing that?" I shrugged, half embarrassed. "Because nobody's handing me a building and a blank check." He smiled. "Good. Handouts seem to come with strings. What if we go find something broken and make it ours?" The simplicity of the question rattled me. For years, I'd been waiting for permission I was never going to get. Maybe this was it, not permission from my parents, but partnership with someone who believed the risk was worth it. It took a few months of weekend drives and failed leads before we found the building. About half an hour outside Columbus, in a small town that had seen better days, a former printing warehouse sat just off the main road, windows boarded, graffiti curling across the brick. The lot behind it was cracked asphalt, sprouting weeds, and a single maple tree that had somehow thrived anyway. The listing photos were terrible, which helped, but what caught my eye was the bones, tall ceilings, wide spans, and existing mezzanine. The seller, a widower named Leonard Briggs, met us there on a chilly morning, keys jangling in his hand. "My wife wanted to turn this place into an art center before she got sick," he said, voice rough. "Never had the chance. I'm too old to do it myself now, but I'd rather sell it to someone with a vision than let it rot." He dropped the asking price by nearly a third when he realized we weren't just flippers. The money part wasn't magic. Tristan had savings from years at his firm. I had what I'd scraped together from my projects and a tiny cushion from my severance. We put everything on the table, literally sitting at my chipped kitchen table with a spreadsheet open between us. We met with a bank, laid out our plan for a mixed use live work building with sustainable systems and rentable studios. Because Leonard was willing to carry a small note on part of the price, and the town council liked the idea of bringing something new to a dead block. We managed to secure a modest construction loan with a terrifyingly real signature line. We parked a used camper behind the warehouse to save on rent and spent the first nights there listening to trains in the distance and wondering if we'd just made the smartest or dumbest decision of our lives. The renovation was slow, dirty, and nothing like the glossy montages you see in commercials. We spent the first month just hauling debris out old pallets, rusted equipment, piles of damp paper that had fused into a kind of sad sculpture in one corner. Tristan reinforced steel columns while I worked with an electrician to rewire the place. We cut new windows into the brick to flood the main floor with light, added a mezzanine apartment for me, using prefabricated framing we could lift ourselves, and carved out small studios along one side for future tenants. A wood shop, a ceramic space, a tiny photography studio. On the roof, we installed a modest solar array and planted sedum trays so the building would stay cooler in summer. We set up a rainwater harvesting system to irrigate a little courtyard garden where the cracked asphalt had been. Every night I went to sleep, bone-tired, fingers raw, but some part of me finally felt like it belonged to my own life. By month 6, the transformation was undeniable. The graffiti-stained Hulk had become something we started calling Riverline Works, a name that made sense once we cleared the overgrowth and realized a narrow creek ran behind the property. The main hall was bright and flexible, able to host pop-up markets or classes. My apartment on the mezzanine was small, but filled with light, the windows framing sunsets over the rusted train tracks like moving art. The studios had already attracted 2 tenants, a furniture maker and a screen printer who both admitted they never thought they'd find affordable space that didn't feel like a basement. On a quiet afternoon with drop cloths finally folded and tools mostly put away, I climbed the stairs, stood on the mezzanine railing, and took a single wide photo of the space. I posted it online with one caption: "Took an abandoned warehouse and built a home and community from scratch." I put my phone in my pocket and went back to work. By the next morning, my phone was a constant pulse of notifications. People shared the post, called it inspiring, asked for tours. Local reporters reached out for interviews. A regional architecture blog ran a feature on the woman turning forgotten Ohio buildings into futures, and for the first time in my life, strangers saw me as something other than an afterthought. Work flooded in consulting on an old school turned community center, advising on a small town library renovation, helping a coffee roaster plan a new roastery and cafe. I set up an actual company, hired a part-time assistant, and kept a wait list for studio spaces at Riverline. It felt like the world had finally tuned into a frequency I'd been broadcasting on alone for years, and it all happened without a single phone call from my parents. 2 years after that dinner, on a soft morning, I was on my knees in the courtyard at Riverline Works planting herbs in a raised bed when I heard tires squeal out front. The sound didn't match the usual slow roll of delivery vans or tenants' cars. I wiped my hands on my jeans, walked through the main hall, and saw a shiny SUV nose in crooked at the curb. The driver's door flew open. Chase stepped out in pressed jeans and a button-down that didn't quite hide the weight he'd lost. His eyes swept over the building, the sign, the open doors behind me. He tapped his phone, voice tight. "Mom, Dad, you need to come here. Now." I leaned against the doorway, dirt still under my fingernails, and let him see exactly how not wrecked my life was. "Chase," I said finally, "you're blocking the loading zone." He turned, and for a second, the confident older brother I'd grown up with flickered back into place. Then his face crumpled with something like panic. "You live here?" he asked, glancing up at the mezzanine. "They said you were barely getting by, that you were bouncing between odd jobs." I shrugged. They were wrong. His gaze traveled over the studios, the courtyard, the solar panels on the roof. I don't understand, he said, voice cracking. My bar. We expanded too fast. Then the franchise went under. The bank called the loans. After my divorce, I moved back home. They're still paying for everything. Mom keeps saying, don't be reckless like your sister. And I listen because I don't know who I am without them writing the checks. For a moment, I almost forgot how much his success had been used as a weapon against me. All I saw was my brother, shoulders slumped, stuck in a different trap built from the same house. You could leave, I said quietly. They don't own you. He let out a bitter laugh. Easy for you to say. You got out. Before I could answer, an older sedan, not the gleaming SUV my parents used to drive, pulled up behind his. My dad climbed out slower than I remembered, my mom following with a tight grip on her purse. They both stopped when they saw the building, the sign, the tenants' cars. This is it? My dad asked, like Riverline Works was an accusation. Where did you get the money for all this? You expect me to believe you built it on diner tips and paint. I stepped fully into the doorway, the building at my back, like a quiet witness. You remember that night you told me you back winners? I asked. From that moment on, every time you dismissed me, every time you turned my work into a joke, I stored it up. I took that hurt and spun it into hours on site, into saying yes to people who believed in me, into sleeping in a camper instead of asking you for help. My dad's jaw tightened as he walked closer, eyes darting over every detail like he was searching for the flaw that would prove his narrative right. You built this just to throw it in our faces, he said. My mom's voice shook behind him. We only ever wanted what was best for you. I almost laughed. No, I said. You wanted what made you look best. There's a difference. Chase hovered to the side, pale, while the air between my parents and me turned heavier than any steel beam I'd ever calculated. My dad's voice dropped. Do you have any idea what we've lost trying to keep this family afloat? He asked. We co-signed those loans for your brother's bar. When the franchise folded, the bank came for the house. We had to sell, move into an apartment, start over with nothing. Your mother had to go back to work. Our friends stopped calling. And here you are acting like you're better than us. For the first time, I saw something like shame in his eyes, but it came wrapped in resentment, not humility. Did you do all of this for revenge? He asked. The creak behind the building gurgled softly, the only sound for a long moment. No, I said finally. Revenge would mean I still care what you think. I built this so your opinions would stop mattering at all. My mom started to cry, covering her face with her hands. We were wrong, she said between breaths. We thought pouring everything into your brother would lift everyone. We didn't realize we were grinding you down. We see it now. We're proud of you, Morgan. We really are. The words landed like someone dropping a bouquet onto a grave years too late. Tristan stepped out from one of the studios, wiping sawdust off his hands, and came to stand beside me, not saying anything, just existing as a quiet line of support. My dad looked between us at the building at Chase. Maybe we can be a family again, he said. We could bring people out here, show them what our daughter built. It'd mean something. I shook my head, the decision already solid inside me. You don't get to claim this, I said. You didn't want the version of me who did the work. You don't get to put your name on the finished project. They left with more muttered apologies and half-formed suggestions than I cared to count. The sedan pulled away, Chase's SUV following, gravel crunching under their tires. I stood in the courtyard until the dust settled, feeling not triumphant, not vindicated, but strangely calm. Later, through mutual acquaintances and the bits of news Columbus can't help but spread, I heard what happened. Chase took a management job at a distribution warehouse 3 hours away, working long shifts for someone else's dream. My parents stayed in their small apartment, my dad picking up part-time work at a hardware store, my mom piecing together hours at a clinic. The people who used to crowd their table for game nights and celebration dinners got quieter, then disappeared, because the glow of having a successful son had gone out, and they didn't know what to do with ordinary. A few weeks after their visit, an envelope arrived at Riverline Works with my name written in my dad's careful block letters. Inside was a photo of their old house with a sold sign in front and a letter filled with unsteady sentences about loving me badly, about fear and comparison, about finally understanding that the daughter they'd dismissed had built something real. At the bottom, they asked if they could come see the building again properly this time and maybe talk about future opportunities as a family. I read it standing in the mezzanine sunlight pooling on the floor, tenants' voices drifting up from below. Then I folded the letter, put it in a box in the back of my closet, and let it stay unanswered. Not out of cruelty, but because I knew that opening that door would mean inviting all the old conditions back in. I had worked too hard to strip those out of my foundation. These days, my life is smaller in some ways and bigger in others. Riverline Works has a wait list for studio space. On Saturday mornings, the courtyard fills with people browsing pop-up markets and kids chasing each other between planters. Tristan and I are partners in more ways than one. He proposed with a simple ring he'd made from a slice of steel beam we removed from the warehouse, polished until it caught the light, but still clearly what it was. Sometimes we stand on the mezzanine and look down at everything we've built, and I realize the peace I feel has nothing to do with whether my parents ever understand me. I have boundaries now, and those are worth more than any check they could write. I don't take their calls. I don't read any letters beyond that first one. They exist somewhere out there dealing with the fallout of their choices, and I exist here building a life that doesn't require their presence or their permission. If you grew up being told you were the risky one, the backup plan, the kid not worth betting on, I hope you hear this clearly. You are allowed to stop auditioning for a role in someone else's version of family. You are allowed to walk away from people who only recognize your value when they think they can leverage it for themselves. My parents gave my brother money and gave me silence. That silence used to feel like a verdict. Now it feels like insulation, like the soundproofing that lets me hear my own voice. I'm done giving them chances. I'm done waiting for them to change. I built my own kind of home, and they don't have a key. If this hit close to home for you, tell me in the comments what part of my story sounded familiar and what you would do in my place, and make sure to subscribe and share so other people know they're not alone.